welcome back to the program. Let's begin this morning on line number 6. And say good morning to a gentleman who has, without question, been one of the most in tune followers and critics of the Muskrat Falls project. He's Uncle Gnarly to some, Des Sullivan, here this morning. Good morning, Des, you're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure to have you on this morning, sir. I read your most recent blog post, and the headline, the title is, Muskrat Cost Estimates, a Complete Falsification, says engineer. Elaborate for us, sir.
Well, as you know, Paddy, since I began this blog, much of it on the Muskrat Falls project, because obviously I had great concerns about this for a variety of reasons from the very beginning. But an important comment is that this blog has been substantially supported by advice and information from professional engineers who worked directly on various aspects of the Muskrat Falls project. So this wasn't a matter of, some guy sitting down in a room with his typewriter and banging out some opinions based on contrived information that he himself might have conceived. This came directly from guys on the site in various aspects of the project. And increasingly, over the last couple of years, I've been getting emails and phone calls from professional engineers concerned about various aspects. And, the issue of the original cost estimate has come up many times. I've had many engineers say to me, look, Des, those numbers were never right. It was the number 6.2 billion was done or was used because it was perceived to be politically saleable at the time, and they could wrap some numbers around justifying it in the context of the what we call the isolated island alternative.
So your assertion, Des, is that
the point I was going to make, Paddy, was that on this occasion I had an email from an engineer and followed up with him, and he put it probably in the most graphic terms I have heard it or seen it since I began writing this blog. And he basically said the following: to begin with, and I'm quoting now, the original cost of $6.2 billion on which the project was approved was a complete falsification. The estimate was deliberately kept low, below $7 billion, so as to appear favorable to the cost of thermal generation. And then he goes on to say, and I won't give you the entire quote, but he says the likely costs were known about 3 years ago, but Nalcor management kept it a secret, steadfastly denying that there were major schedule delays and cost overruns, as we know. And of course, when this quote goes on, by the way, but as we know, when we got some of the higher cost estimates for this project, they were talked about in the media and certainly on my blog for a long, long time. Everyone knew that there was a larger cost estimate coming, but those things got suppressed. But I think that not to cut you off, but I just say one other thing. I think what is really disconcerting about the comments of this engineer is that it looks like confirmation that the original cost estimate of 6.2 was a fiction, that it was contrived. The word I always use was contrived. This guy didn't mince any words at all. He said it was falsified.
I understand. So just to boil it back to a couple of things that were in the conversation when it was 6.2 billion. They used their cost comparisons insofar as their position as lowest cost alternative was against $150 barrel, $150 per barrel of oil, which of course was probably the high water mark they could have ever even considered as part of the public conversation at that point. And also, well, I guess this is the question. So are you saying that they used that number, they just plucked one out that said, well, that's as much as we could possibly get away with when we do a thermal comparison, and then for the kilowatt hour charge, we will come up with a number and reverse engineer from there to come up with a cost?
I think that this engineer is saying that apart from the reference to basing the original number on the then price of oil, which was at a historic high, pretty much, that the actual construction estimates were contrived.
Okay.
That they were actually much higher, but that Nalcor management chose a lower number because it was politically saleable and would not perhaps, and I don't know the answer to this, and perhaps it's an item that one should not apply conjecture, because I think that the allegation is quite important, quite significant, and deserves really an official inquiry. But I think it is clear that this individual, along with other engineers, are saying that, looked at through a proper lens, this project was never at 6.2 billion. The number was always somewhat higher, and it was kept low, basically to obtain project sanction.
Fair enough. I wonder what people, I say this all the time. It's easy enough to wrap your mind around dollar amounts in the hundreds and thousands. And it gets to millions, and very few people have dealt with those numbers, me included, which makes it easy to understand. Billions, there's a scattered few who could really understand the implication of billions. I wonder what the motivation would be to pluck 6.2. Would it have made much difference in people's minds had it been 6.2, 7.2, or 8 on the nose at the initial sanction point? I understand your point. I just always wonder how much association we give to what a billion means and a repayment schedule.
Well, I'll say a couple of things.
Yep.
One, if you go back to the Astaldi contract, which was supposed to have cost around 1 billion, and we're up to 1.8, okay? Mm-hmm. That's an incredible expansion of that number of 1 billion. And I've had contractors come to me and said, look, we have assessed some of the work that Astaldi wanted done following their receipt of the contract, and they asked us to get some of the work done while we were gearing up. And when we did the numbers, they were absolutely frightened at our cost estimates and refused to let us go ahead. And that was one of the reasons that Astaldi productivity was so low, because it had such a late start, with all of which, of course, contributed towards delaying the project and enhancing cost overruns. But here, on Astaldi alone, you got a $1.8 billion contract, originally estimated at 1. And these engineers will tell you that when you compare it, the original Astaldi proposal or tender with the Canadian bids, that anyone who understood the project management, who understood the nature of what you were getting into here, not just in terms of the cold Labrador environment, the harsh conditions that you have to go through for at least 6-7 months of the year, but also all the logistics involved, that the Astaldi bid got accepted because it was the lowest one, but that everyone knew, or at least anyone who knew Northern Labrador work, or Labrador work and work in a subarctic environment, that this was not going to last. This was a fiction. So
it was a concern, Wally.
You can take that on, but I think the key here is that you have to look at the specific allegation that this engineer, in particular, although there are others, is stating that the 6.2 was a falsification. That, for an engineer, is a substantial thing to say.
Well, of course
engineers don't go around saying that kind of thing.
And fair enough, and it's a very serious accusation. Is there associated documentation to give us a better understanding of how we deem 6.2 as a pure falsification? Because we will Of course, in the Astaldi contract, that was a widely held concern and question for many. It was a very controversial decision, and I don't think anybody thought it was a wise one at the time. Nobody.
Right.
Is there documentation from this engineer where he sort of backs up the assertion of the falsification and he's put it to paper as to what components were obviously undercut so far as forecasts of Nalcor go? Anything else?
I did not get into
I'm
these
just
kinds of whether he has that kind of documentation. I don't know, Paddy.
Okay.
I did not get into it to that degree, but he is quite adamant that this number was contrived from the very beginning, and that Newfoundland and Labrador ought to look to government for some leadership on doing a real assessment of this project, not just from the point of view of how and under what assumptions gave rise to sanction, but that government should now also review the cost going forward, because this engineer is also saying that the current cost estimate of around 11.7 is still low, that in fact, given all that he knows, that this will likely end up close to $15 billion. And to be fair, Paddy, he will not be the first engineer to have said it.
No, there's been many people make those sorts of long-term forecasts on the end price. I have no idea, pardon me.
Some people do throw it out as a wild guess or a wild figure. But there are some engineers who know this project well enough, who know the construction business and the mega project business well enough to be able to make these kinds of assertions with on an educated basis. So I think that for this engineer and others, when he says 15 billion, it's not a figure just lightly thrown around.
I appreciate your time this morning, Des. Thank you, sir.
Good to talk to you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Serious allegations, and of course, what we would need, and the question that I asked Des, and he wouldn't be able to answer on behalf of the engineer on this front, of course, is, what leads to that assertion? And the documentation, because a professional engineer wouldn't be just plucking numbers, and they would have maybe something to back it up in firm fashion. We can do the compare and contrast to how Nalcor forecasted their numbers for the different facets of the project. That's very interesting. Okay, let's go ahead and take a break. When we come back, Bonnie's in the queue, then you.
Call now, 273